ISG is helping our clients on their continuous journeys to digital transformation, operational excellence, and faster growth. Through uncertain times, we are here to help you get the most from your digital investments, delivering integrated digital and enterprise solutions and providing the best advice and support across borders and time zones. We are a leading global technology research and advisory firm, but we are more than that. We are the ones who get it done for you.
Good evening to our North American guests and good morning to our Asia Pacific guests. In the spirit of reconciliation, ISG acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to the land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginals and Torres Strait Island peoples today. On behalf of ISG, we welcome you to the launch of our 2022 ISG Provider Lens program. My name is Sandy Breeze. I lead the provider relationships for Asia Pacific, and I am your host for this session. So who are we? We are the leading global research and advisory firm with more than 700 clients, 1,300 employees across 21 countries, and we've advised on more than 150 billion deals since 2010, which represents around 60% share of the market, with an average TCV of $18 billion. We specialize in strategic sourcing, operational improvement, governance, and change management. This morning, I'm pleased to introduce you to the following speakers who will take you on a journey in terms of who we are, what we do, why, and of course, what is the ISG Provider Lens program. Scott Bursch, ISG Partner and Head of Asia Pacific. Michael Gale, ISG Partner and Head of Delivery, Craig Beatty, ISG IPL Research Lead, and Prakash Manuel, my colleague who leads our Asia Pacific business, and he will be presenting later on today to tell you more about the 8 new reports that we'll be delivering for Singapore and Malaysia. On that note, I would like to now hand you over to Scott Bursch to tell you more about ISG. Thank you and have a fabulous day. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you very much, Sandy, and good morning and good evening to everyone around the world. It's great to have you all here. As Sandy mentioned, I'm Scott Bursch, and I have the good fortune of leading the incredible ISG APAC team. I've been with ISG since 2000 and in Sydney, Australia in my current role for just over 3 years. As you saw in the video and as Sandy mentioned, we're a leading global IT research and advisory firm, and we have over 1,300 people. And I'm going to go through a couple of things of what makes our people and our over 700 leading enterprise clients relevant to each of you and to our clients. Basically, the most important thing is it gives us unmatched data and insights in the market that we make available to you and our client partners as well. Speaking of those partnerships, we've built on these partnerships in 2021 to achieve record 11% growth for ISG globally and over $275 million in revenue in US dollars. In addition to our client partners, we've got all of you as provider partners as well. And we track over 2,000 providers globally that our clients consider as potential partners. In Australia, we now have over 100 people, which is a milestone that we passed in Q4 of last year. In 2021, we partnered with 67 of the leading ASX listed firms in Australia, plus numerous key Commonwealth and state government agencies. Our APAC revenue was up over 35% last year, and while we don't individually report on APAC, Asia versus Australia, we were up even more than 35% in Australia. There's been an explosion in digital transformation in Australia since the COVID pandemic started a couple of years ago, and we don't see that slowing. We're seeing long-time and first-time outsourcers alike are transforming like never before. So why that's relevant to you and to the IPLs? Well, globally, as Sandy mentioned, we advise on over 60% of the contract awards over $5 million globally. And that's unmatched. Obviously, we dominate the market when the rest of the firms out there are doing less than half of all the deals, and we're at 60%. We're tracking and negotiating more large contracts than anyone in the world. And we're about people, but we're also about data and insights and driving operational excellence for our clients and our provider partners. And the IPLs are an important part of this. That's why we continue to invest in the IPLs. This year, we'll have more than triple the 7 IPLs from last year, going to 22 across APAC, and 14 of those will be in Australia. Before I turn it over to Michael Gale, I'd like to recognize Craig Beatty and his firm Data Driven as our IPL partner and research partner, and really commend them on the great work he and his team have done in developing, with the rest of our global research and advisory teams, the IPLs in Asia Pacific and specifically here in Australia. With that, I'll turn it over to Michael Gale to tell you a little bit more about the state of sourcing in Australia and why the IPLs are important and how they fit into our advisory practice here. Michael?
Thanks very much, Scott. So Sandy asked me to quickly talk to you about why IPLs are so important for the advisory community. And look, it goes back to one of the big problems we've got in this market, that people still do business on relationships, and they have an inherent bias towards selecting the providers that they know and love, but they may not be selecting the best providers. And those providers that they know and love 5, 10 years ago may not be the best providers for the work that they're doing today. So everything is dramatically more complex. Back in 2000, when I started this game, it was pretty easy. You really had to know about 5 or 6 providers well. And it was really a choice of 1 or 2. It wasn't a really tough game. Now it is totally different. It is about, there must be at least 30 or 40, and then the niche providers that only do a particular component of work. So you really have to understand much more of the market. You really have to understand much more of the capability. And what we find is we can't do that without good research. Part of our role is also to educate our clients on what the marketplace is doing and who are the good players and the bad players. One of the things we do pretty early on is try and open up the field of what an RFP long list looks like. So inevitably, there are those ones that they know and love. There are those that are incumbents. There are those then that we often suggest to say, look, maybe you should consider provider X. It might give you a better outcome. And if nothing else, because we have great trust with our clients, they often do listen to us, and that means that they actually see the market in a different light. We also know that in recent years, we haven't been able to really value the IPLs as well as we could, because the IPLs for us were very much global, and now they're Australian-based, and Australian-based IPLs for us are really important. Same thing in Asia. So having that really detailed knowledge of who in Australia is really good at what they do is absolutely critical for our advisors, absolutely critical for our clients as well. It's also really important for us because if you think about our competition, our biggest competition is clients doing it themselves. Our second biggest competition is actually one-man bands or small groups of sourcing advisors. But they don't have the depth and reach that we have, and they don't invest in the IPL research that we do. So this is a really important differentiator for our advisor business as well. So in every transaction, we run a thing called the Candidate Provider Qualification Process. This is about, we actually put in the requirements of what your client is trying to achieve. what the scope is, what the market characteristics are that we're looking for. And we get a CPQ report that provides us with a really long list. That CPQ report is largely based on the IPLs. So the research that we do in the IPLs flows through to the CPQs. That flows through to our development of the long list. And that helps us select the providers that are best suited to a particular transaction that we're doing. So that's why it's really important. Without that, we're still back to who have we worked with before, what was our last transaction, what's our impression of the markets, what have we heard. So using fact-based data is actually really important for us. One of the things that I would say is, the US have a requirement, which is that it's a mandatory requirement for everyone to use a CPQ, whether they're sole source, only incumbents, whether the client's interested or not in another party. And the reason we do that is because, again, we really need to understand the market, and it's really good for us to understand broadly. In Australia, what we're finding, though, is our advisors actually want to use the CPQ process. They want to understand the market better. It's a really good base and a really good talking point. And by the way, it gives our advisors great credibility in the marketplace. So that's why it's really important. Again, I'd also like to thank Craig for the great work that he's done with Data Driven, pulling this together. We now have a reasonable base of Australian-only IPLs plus our global IPLs. We're in a really good position. So let me pass this on to Craig, and he's going to walk you through a little bit about the IPL process and what we're doing in Australia.
Great, thank you very much, Michael. It's great to be here. This is the third season or third year that we'll be running IPLs in this part of the world. We started 2 years ago with one, which was cybersecurity services and solutions in Australia, followed by digital business. Last year we did 7, and this year we're doing 14. And so in today's presentation, I'm going to start with what is an IPL and how do we put it together. Some of the best practices that providers should follow in this part of the world. It's slightly different because of our focus on local, extremely local, and you'll hear that word a lot. Remember local when you think of anything to do with IPLs in this part of the world. And then I'll show you the global agenda and talk about what we're doing locally and introduce the team, and then hand over to Sandy to run Q&A. So what you can see here is a slide. This is the new format of the ISG provider lens. It's the first one that will be published using this as the Microsoft Ecosystems Partners for Australia. So that will be coming out very soon. I want to talk about everyone has some kind of a grid, some kind of a quadrant, some kind of a wave or whatever. I want to talk about the differentiators for ISG. The first one is that it's local. It compares providers that are active in each market that we look at. So in this case, it's Australia and then Malaysia and Singapore. And this afternoon, there will be a webinar specifically in the Malaysia-Singapore time zone. So if you have colleagues who would benefit from that, who are in that time zone, or maybe a UK time zone, that might be useful. That's 2 p.m. Singapore, 5 p.m. Australia, and sometime in the morning in Europe. The second thing is, as Michael mentioned, the IPL is actually relied on very heavily by local advisors. I'll talk about the CPQ process in a moment, but if an IPL exists, it really makes it a lot easier for the advisors to make sure that they've captured almost everyone in the market. They've been thoroughly evaluated based on a global consistent model. We also regularly present the ISG provider lens to your customers, to enterprise and government. And we've done 7 or 8 of those in the last 12 months. And this might be to large financial organizations or transport organizations or government departments. And we present the grids and we give them a lot more detail and behind the scenes information. And in some cases, this results in specific engagements. So this might be an engagement that talks about who can do RPA in Australia and who are the top 10 providers, or one we did with DPRAG about data center providers in Asia. And so the IPL is often the starting point to a bigger engagement with an enterprise, or in some cases with providers as well. It's used also to show the end users and the enterprises what the providers can do in a non-adversarial way. So one of the differentiators for ISG is we want to match you with an end user. So we're not going to put extra terminology and information in the way in the IPL that confuses the provider, because you have, and the end user, because the end user has their definition and their RFI. And then the provider tries to match that, but puts their terminology in. So we don't put another overlay. We represent the market. Many of you will have been on something called a COI call, which is a community of interest, where we actually ask you for input into the design of each IPL going forward. And if you're interested in that in this part of the world, let me know. We only invite 1 or 2 each time, but if there's something that piques your interest in the agenda, let us know, and we'll make sure that you're on the community of interest call to actually help us design the IPL for this year, because we want to know what you're actually selling, and we also want to know what the enterprises are buying. So we don't beat up the providers. We don't have a light side or a dark side. Everyone's equal. The idea is to communicate and match you. Then, of course, we need to actually say what you're good at and what you might be bad at. And so every IPL starts with an overview. There's a 1-page report for every provider, and I'll show you an example of that soon. We have 3 strengths, which are the things that we think are the most important. And bear in mind, we can't put everything in there because we have a word count limit. We can't even go over 1 word in the strength or in the document itself, or else it'll throw everything out of whack. We will share with you the document that we write if you end up being a leader or a rising star. And you can change factual words, but you can't change superlatives and adjectives. We'll also have a caution. Now, caution is something that can be acted on to improve the provider position. And it's not necessarily a beat up. It might be something that just says your marketing may not be strong enough, you need to improve that. Or it might be you're known in certain verticals, but you need to improve this vertical. And there's probably about 70 or 80 different things that we might put in there. And it's something that you can act on, or something that your clients can be aware of. Maybe you're going through an acquisition. We will, of course, say, be careful during the acquisition. Please watch what's going on. Make sure the team that's assigned to you is the team that you're given, and so on, those kinds of things. And then there'll be an analyst comment. And this is something that highlights what you do really well. And if you decide to leverage the IPL, we go to market activities, and we'll talk about that at the end. This is the quote that you can use in a media release or on your website, and more can be provided. The other thing is that although we do local IPLs, so we will do cybersecurity in Australia and cybersecurity in Singapore, Malaysia, we'll also do one in Brazil and UK and Europe and US and a number of other countries, could be up to 9 or 10 countries. And so because it is local and we're evaluating you vertically on your portfolio and horizontally on your competitive strength, and we'll talk more about what goes into those in a moment, it means that we need to have some level of global consistency. Although everyone is different, it wouldn't make sense if you're in the top right leader in Australia and you end up in the bottom left leader in the US. And if you're a US company, that might be strange. So we have a global team. There's a quality and consistency review team, which is made up of all of the lead analysts. So if there are 7 countries, there are 7 lead analysts, all the research analysts and all the project managers. So there might be 15 people on that call, plus an advisor representative from each country. So Michael Gale often takes part, Deepraj takes part, and members of his team, to make sure that although we're doing it locally, that there is some level of consistency. And if we see provider X very high in the US and very low in Australia, what's our reason for doing that? So we need to make sure that happens. Secondly, there is a global process. It's a very detailed process. An IPL, if it launches in February, it may not be published until June. That's because there are translation processes, there's editing and graphics processes. There's something called a sneak preview where we show you where you are. There's the fact check. Then there's the final approvals. There's the media release, and there's the publication. So it is quite a long process. So now that I've given you that very detailed overview of what the quadrant is and its role and how it's used, let's talk about the Cpq process very quickly. This is a synthesized overview of a very, very complex process that Michael talked about. When we're doing a project for a client, we start with a long list, and then a shorter list, and then a mature list, and then a very, very short list. The IPL goes through the same process. For cybersecurity in Australia, we had something like 300 providers. We ended up plotting 50, and maybe about 15 or 20 were leaders. And so where the IPL exists, it helps make sure that this process is done very smoothly and efficiently. So the IPLs feed into here. And that's why we're doing 14 this year. All the topic areas that Australia and 8 in Malaysia are interested in. So the next slide shows the segmentation. Now, one thing people who are used to IPLs from a provider side will notice is that when we send out the RFI, and we call it an RFI, it's actually a survey, there are multiple tabs in it. ISG doesn't just do one segment. For example, in Australia, we won't just do identity and access management and produce a grid. We will do the whole ecosystem. So this is everything that we believe is in cybersecurity that an enterprise may need to choose. IAM, DLP, advanced endpoint, managed security, technical security, and strategic security services. Some IPLs have 7 grids, some have 2 or 3, but in general, we try and cover the whole ecosystem. For example, in the Microsoft one, we cover Azure, SAP, Office 365, Dynamics, and Power Platforms. So what that means is it's not a 12 or 13 page report. It's a 100 or 150 page report split into the 4, 5, 6, or 7 segments, so it's fairly detailed. And as such, we only write about the leaders and the people who are called rising stars. Now, a leader is in the top right corner. A rising star is someone or an organization who hasn't quite made it to a leader, but we have every indication that in the next 12 to 24 months, they may become a leader. It might be they're just concluding an acquisition and the combined entity will become a leader next year, but this year they're not. It might be that they have entered Australia a couple of years ago. They've now got some big deals on the board, but the revenue hasn't flowed through, or they haven't quite turned it into a successful delivery yet. So there are lots of reasons to make you a rising star. So a rising star is actually a very exciting thing for many organizations as well. It means that they're actually on the map. So every ISG provider lens has a definition. There's a brochure that comes out. It's about 14 pages. It talks about what the study is. This one's cybersecurity. It then has an introduction. And then for every segment, there's a 1-page description plus the eligibility criteria. And these are available on the website as they get launched. And when you receive an invitation to take part, you get a copy of the brochure as well. So for all of the IPLs that are listed in the agenda at the end, there'll be a brochure as soon as it's launched. So the process in 3 steps, I won't go through this in a lot of detail, but basically there's a kickoff and research phase. The kickoff is where we start by talking to providers about what should be in the IPL. We review last year's progress, we review the acceptance of the report and any feedback, and then we design the report. Then we send an invitation to say, would you like to take part in this survey? And so you get a link to a portal. I'll show you an example of that in a moment. And then you take part. And then we ask you to do a local briefing. And that's very important. I'll talk about that in a moment. After we've written the report, there's something called the fact check and sneak preview. The fact check is where we send you the write-up. If you're a leader or a rising star, you're automatically invited to this. If you've taken part in the survey and you would like to see where you are, we can arrange that as well, even if you're not a leader. Some providers are so happy to be on an IPL that they go ahead and use it for marketing purposes as well. And I'll explain why they might do that. If they're not a leader, why would they use it to promote themselves? That's a good question. We'll handle that in a minute. Then the sneak preview is where myself or the lead analyst, wherever they are in the world, will give you a local briefing for 15 to 20 minutes that explains where you are on the grid and explains your strengths and cautions. And you get to ask a few questions about that. It's not your opportunity to argue or to change things unless we have the facts wrong. And we don't talk about your competitors. We only talk about you and your position on the slide. There are other mechanisms to talk about your competitors through engagements and workshops, but that's not covered in the normal IPL process. And then there's a press release and media publishing. And so that's when ISG will automatically name all of the leaders and rising stars in this part of the world. And if you've decided to leverage a go-to-market package, you might have a link to your website or other marketing activities. And I'll show you the list of how you do that at the end. So the research steps, and this is where I'm going to do a little bit more of a deep dive into what we do, because it's very important that providers get this right and know how we do things. And so if you take away one thing from this presentation, it's how we do the research and the 3 slides about best practice for actually filling in the RFI and giving us a local briefing. So whether you take part formally or informally, if you're active in the market, ISG will evaluate you. So you can't say, sorry, we're not here, we don't want to be evaluated. If you've got revenue and if you've got customers, and if we believe that you're doing things here, we will evaluate you. So if you are here, you're better off giving us some kind of a briefing. Otherwise, we will use secondary research, which is the way many, many organizations do it anyway. So we start by coming up with our short list. We might look at the Microsoft Ecosystem Partners portal and pick all the people who are advanced or premier. We might look at the Google one, or we might already have a database, or we create one from scratch by doing a complete market scan. And my local team and global team look at company websites, information, press releases. We look at all the events that are out there. We looked at LinkedIn, annual reports, service brochures. We talk to the advisors to help us come up with a short list, because they're in the market every day. And then we get information from other online sources. We use something called Capital IQ, which has a database of companies, blogs, medias, podcasts, customer reviews. So fairly extensive secondary research before we even launch the survey. Then we launch the survey, and you get a questionnaire or an RFI, and then we ask for local briefings. And of course, during the year, the analysts take part in your analyst and sourcing events, and so do the advisors as well. Then there are other things that we can do. We can ask you to present a demo or some other kind of a process. There may be actually RFQs that you've taken part in, or RFIs for other organizations. We don't get given anything that's secret or confidential. We may be given an extract of that actually an advisor says, hey, they're in the market. And then there's their own knowledge base. We have the world's largest database of ICT and outsourcing and BPO procurement. It's probably up to 100,000 sourcing contracts now. And we do something called the Isg Index every quarter, where we present the state of sourcing. And if you're interested in that, it's a free event every 3 months. It talks about sourcing. It has all the stats and figures and what we're seeing in the market presented by the global advisory team. So look up Isg Index on the website. Then we have the sourcing advisor views. This is where sourcing advisors have conducted interviews or have developed an awareness of providers. The quality consistency review team, the people who are on our calls with us, might go, oh, I just heard that XYZ Corporation did this. Have you included that for Australia? So that comes into it as well. And then an important thing, the ISG Star of Excellence Awards. There is a slide on that later, and I'll talk about that in more depth. And then our mergers and acquisition database. So as you can see, a combination of local analyst input, local advisor input, local competitor input. We actually ask your competitors who's in the market, the RFI, the briefings, the sourcing events. Very, very extensive base of knowledge. And you can see, for example, how this might pan out in the box in the middle. For example, the Australian Cybersecurity Solutions and Service Providers, IPL. We looked at around about 200 potential providers. Of course, there were more than that on the list, people who say they're doing things but aren't. There might be one person and a dog. We managed to reduce that to 58 providers for detailed analysis based on all of those other aspects and the criteria. We then analyzed, compared, and plotted against the technology areas and 4 levels of capability, from contender right through to leader. And we ended up plotting people on a grid. And the grid first starts with getting information from the IPL portal. Here's an information. I'm not going to go through all this, but in the agenda at the end of this document, there is a complete description. In fact, many of these pages have come from the research agenda, and you can download it. And also, there are a lot of words in this slide deck. It's more of a tutorial. Take it away, print it, or look at it, or distribute it to your team so that you can see what's in there. But the RFI has become very, very sophisticated. It's gone from being just an Excel spreadsheet to an AI-driven document that has preloaded data from last year, so that eventually over time, you won't have to keep filling in the same things. And during the year, you can also add information to the portal. So quite a powerful tool. So a quadrant report, what's in it and how do we evaluate you? So you can see the top right, leader, then underneath that, market challenger, and bottom left, contender, and top left, product challenger. Now, for the cybersecurity one, just to get on this grid, because we only did about 25 on each grid, meant that you are in the top 15 to 20% of providers in Australia. So being in the contender thing doesn't mean loser. It means I beat the other 75% of the market. So please take that into account when you're briefing your executives. Just because you're not the leader, it doesn't mean this isn't important, because this is the grid that will be shown to the federal government or the state government or an enterprise. This is a grid that an advisor will use to start with an RFQ. And a contender might be an organization that's smaller, and in fact, a number of local organizations appear in here. That's another differentiator. we try and pick up local organizations, means that someone will see you, and often there is a requirement in Australia to have a small to medium business partner. So you might be a large organization and you need a partner. That might be where you're looking for your partners. Same with the product challenges and market challenges. It might be where you're looking for your next M&A target, because these organizations are ones that we've identified that are active in the market. So there's lots of other ways you can use the grid. Let's talk about the axes. The y-axis, or the portfolio attractiveness, this is where we judge your basically technical capability and what you're going to deliver and your roadmap for it. So we look at the portfolio, the breadth and depth of the offerings. We look at the portfolio qualities, technology, skills, and your unique selling proposition. Of course, your security capability. There is a IPL on security by itself, but security is overlaid on everything, so it's very important. Strategy and vision, your product roadmap, your thought leadership and investment, and then local characteristics, product support, infrastructure, and partners. Now, if you're a global provider, then this should be relatively consistent. So you can deliver it in Europe and US, you've got a capability in Australia. However, often the ability to deliver here doesn't match the ability to deliver in the US. So you might find that your vertical axis doesn't quite match globally. It should generally be within 10 to 15% of the global one if you're doing what you should be doing here. But sometimes you'll find yourself below the line, and there will always be a reason for that, and we'll explain that. I will mention that we're not meant to have more than 40% of providers in the top right quadrant. And also, under the new guidance, we're not meant to have more than 25 or 26 providers on a quadrant. Some of the Australian ones have 32 or 33 first time around. So we are tightening up the criteria. There will be people who will move to the left and move down based on the new criteria as we try and make the quadrants more differentiatable, so people can actually see in more detail who's where and why they're where they are. So please be aware of that going forward. The x-axis is the competitive strength, and this is my particular focus. Of course, I can get all the global, very, very technical people to tell me about your portfolio, and I actually rely a lot on our global specialists and our global advisors. But locally, I focus a lot on, okay, well, their portfolio is good. Can they actually deliver it here? So what's their market position? Have they sold anything? What are the revenues? What are your growth and contracts and recent deals ones? Are you just in one city on the East Coast, or can you do every city plus Tasmania and maybe New Zealand? New Zealand's not included in the evaluation, but a lot of Australian companies often want to know that as well. Brand reputation. Have we heard of you? We ask the competitors, who are you seeing in the market? Who's displacing you? There's one particular provider who came up 33 times out of 35 interviews. And then another provider that has a good brand presence came up once in terms of, are they bidding for deals? And the advisors rated them lowly as well. So it makes me wonder, that big organization, what are they doing here? So I will take that into account. And if I only get that from secondary research or from the competitors and the advisors, it may result in a less than optimal positioning. So please do a local briefing to tell us what you're doing and why, and we can ask that question. Brand reputation. What's your website doing? Your social media presence, awards and accolades. Are you involved in industry associations? Are you a member of the Australian Information Industry Association or Tech Council of Australia or Australian Information Security Association or Contact Centre, or whatever? Are you involved? Are your people taking a leadership role? Are you advising the government? Are you on any panels? Are you working with universities, think tanks? Are you supporting any charities? These are the things that show that you are committed to Australia or Singapore or Malaysia. These are things that show you're not just here, you're actually helping to develop the industry in the market. Are you training people? Do you have an academy? Do you have some kind of a university program? This is all very important because this is what your customers are looking for. And often in an RFI, RFQ, you need to tick those boxes as well. Which partners are you working with? And then your core competencies, how innovative are you? Your business model and case studies. What's your pricing model look like? Is it fixed price? Do you have penalties? Is it variable priced? Is it a combination of all? Do you focus on just one market, small to medium business or large enterprise? And then your partnerships and M&A, any activities you've got. So as you can see, this is just a summary, but there are actually over 70 criteria, 35 vertically and 35 horizontally, that we can take into account to position you. So it's not just Craig looking at it and throwing a dart at a chart. There is a lot behind it. And if you are technically minded, and if you really want to know, I can do a briefing for you and your team on exactly how we do this behind the scenes. It won't be published directly because there's a lot of IP in there, but I will go through it in more detail. So please let me know about that. I can help you understand that a bit further. How to maximize your input. 3 very big word slides, but this is more like a checklist. So apologies for the words, but it's very important that these are on one page. Firstly, how to maximize your input. Identify which IPL studies cover the services that you're active. Now, often you'll see the word participate in ISG literature. That means you're going to actively take part in the survey. But if you don't actively take part in the survey and you don't do a briefing, we will still evaluate you if you're in the market. So it's best if you give us as much information as possible directly. Otherwise, we'll use the standard industry practice. And I can explain that to you on another call, on that same call, how we do that. But there are models and processes that we go through to make sure that we're as accurate as possible. Once you've identified the studies that you're active in, you'll see those in the agenda, and there'll also be a survey sent out later as well. You can email Angie Ko or Jocelyn Chung. These are part of the APAC research support team, and they will make sure that you are on the mailing list to receive the RFI and for the briefings. Now, having local and global is a bit confusing for some analyst relations teams. Most of our competitors only do global briefings, and so there's only one person to deal with. We really need to deal with your local people as well, because we're interested in seeing your local people on the team. We're evaluating your executive bench strength locally. We want to see how you treat Australian or Singapore, Malaysia customers. We want to hear who your competition is. We want to hear what you're doing. We want to know how you handle local clients. We want to know who your competitors are. So it really doesn't work to have someone in an overseas location give me a presentation at midnight, which I do quite regularly, if they don't have the Australian team there, or if they don't have the direct knowledge of what's happening in Australia, Singapore, and Malaysia. And so one thing we've noticed is that a global team will fill in an RFI, they'll fill in the survey, and they will leave out Australia, and they'll leave out Malaysia and Singapore, or they'll put cursory information in there. What that means is that if I know you're here, I have to send an email to someone saying, hey, look, your global team's done this, but they've left you out. Can you please fix this or give me a local briefing? But please try and reinforce with the global team to include these countries, because it's my first source of information. And look, if the RFI has got good information, and if your presentation has, some case studies about Australia, I'm not talking about one line, I'm talking about 1 or 2 pages for each quadrant, then I may not need a local briefing. It's still nice to have one though, so that we can do that evaluation. So please do your best. Sometimes you'll receive multiple invitations. That's because the global team will get one and I'll have a local person, and then the local person will send it to the global team, and the global team will come back and go, what's happening in Australia? We can't avoid some of those things because there are some organizations that might have 10 departments who are answering the RFI for one IPL. And it becomes almost impossible to work out who's in your organization. So apologies in advance if you get multiples. I'd rather you find out more than once than not find out at all. The local briefings are the key method for ISG to evaluate your local providers. In the Microsoft ecosystem partners, we had 22 local briefings. The problem was some of them happened last week, and we've already started writing the report. So as soon as you find out that there's an ISG IPL happening in this territory, arrange a local briefing. If it's possible, don't wait for your global team to complete the RFI or to tell you about it, because they may take 5 or 6 or 7 weeks then after an extension. This is very normal, and ISG is cracking down on that as well. There won't be as many extensions, if any. Please let us know straight away that you want to be in this market. And so that's why we're developing a local database of contacts and why you might receive multiple information. So please help us there. And also, if you are a local organization, of course, fill in the RFI and in the portal, but we also know that might be onerous. You don't have a big analyst relations team. You might be a smaller company with 100 people, whatever, and you have half a marketing person. We can help you with that. You might fill in the RFI just so it's registered, but then when you give me the local briefing, you might have a page about your operations and your activities and so on. So don't be scared by the big RFI if you don't have the resources. Please let me know and we'll work with you. Our objective is to get the information, not to make it hard for you. And so what to include in your local briefing? It doesn't have to be tailored specifically for ISG. In fact, your standard client presentation, what you present to clients is what I'm interested in. Right? I'm interested in what you would say to have a client Select you in Australia. What services you offer split by the quadrants, often good. I have one provider that gives me a page for each one, showing the revenue, full-time equivalents, their case studies. The next page, it lists their competitors and then a few special things they do, and that's a great format. But you don't have to do that. We can pick it out. And why an organization would select you. And apart from that, send us everything. I can never have too much information. The lead analysts thrive on information. That's what we do. Send a couple of case studies for each quadrant, example of partners, special relationships, anything you do in the country that supports your operations. Like there's one provider we have that has 5 people sitting in Seattle in the US testing stuff for Microsoft, Australian company. Please send related case studies, and all of these materials should be readily available if you're actually active in this market. These are the things your clients want. Difficult revenue questions. I'm not going to labor this point. You can read this, but we ask for some very detailed information. And now I would say 25 to 30% of what will move you to the right is your scale. What revenues you have, how many customers you have, the average deal size, the number of full-time equivalents. Some organizations give this to us readily. Some organizations go, oh, we can't do that. And then they say no. But please help us with a range. It might be, oh, we've got between 100 and 200 million in Australia, and that's about it. And then I might go on the local briefing and go, well, is about 50% of that from 365? And you might go, oh, it's probably more like 40%. We can have that kind of discussion to develop a range. Otherwise, I am going to take your global revenue and multiply it by 2.8% for Australia. That's what all the other analyst firms do. Australia is 2.8% on average of the global market. So, you know, if your global revenue is X and I multiply it by 2.8%, that might make you look really big, or it might make you look really small. So in the end, it comes down to modeling according to standard approaches. So please help us. Confidentiality. We're all under NDA. If you tell me something over the phone or a WhatsApp or an email or in a briefing, I do not record revenue numbers that are given to me in that format. The only time that that's recorded is if it goes into the RFI. So if you want to have a kind of an off-the-books conversation to help without violating any probity or compliance issues, then we're happy to do that as well. But please help us to help you to get it right. So they're the important things. A couple of other things. We've introduced the ISG Star of Excellence program input to the IPL. Star of Excellence is a program that's been around for some time. It's where your customers vote for you. And so the ISG research team is now running this program. And in every RFI, there'll be a link there that you can send to your customers to say, hey, please vote for us in the Star of Excellence program. If you do win a Star of Excellence award, there's a ceremony and there's trophies or whatever. But more importantly, where we do have this in the survey, it'll take between 3 to 5% on the X value of the IPL. So it's being integrated formally. And there's more information here on the Star of Excellence page. And then, of course, if you're a winner, leader or whatever, there are global provider lens awards ceremonies, some physical, some virtually. If it's virtual, I do a video for you and it gets shown. If it's local, then, and it's possible due to COVID, then you get to attend and get it. And we haven't decided what format it is for Australia, Singapore, and Malaysia this year, but you will all be mentioned in the global ceremonies anyway, to start with. And then finally, go-to-market support. There is a big list here of things that you as a provider can do if you're a leader or a rising star, or even if you're positioned elsewhere, to leverage your position. So I'm not in sales. I'm not going to sell you anything. You look at this, but there are white papers, there are webinars. You can have the lead analyst host a thought leadership roundtable. You can have a readout for 30 or 40 minutes to your staff. And locally, if you decide as a sweetener, if you decide to actually go ahead and use the go-to-market program by buying a reprint, then I will deliver a 30-minute presentation internally to your sales and marketing team to explain your position as a value add. So that's something you can look forward to if you decide to go ahead. That helps you with any of your marketing programs. The annual plan. This is the APAC team. All these people work for me. They're all quite well known in the industry. They're either professional researchers or data analysts, or they've worked in IT services in Gartner or IDC or IDG or Strategic Publishing Group or Frost & Sullivan. And so this is the team that's working on the IPLs plus other projects. The calendar. The vertical lines in red are the ISG Australia and Singapore ones. You can look at this in more detail later, but you can see that we've already closed 3 in this part of the world. Coming up, very important, private hybrid cloud, cybersecurity, and network software-defined everything are in progress at the moment. If you haven't received an invitation to these and you believe you're active in Australia, Singapore, and Malaysia, in those 3 areas, please let us know. And then we have 2 more launching in the next month, payroll solutions and services and Google ecosystem. And they're in the design phase, so please let us know. And then on the next page is the rest of the agenda. You can see the ticks. The blue ones means that it's a new regional report, and the ones that ticks means that that's what we're doing already. Finally, in the agenda, there is an overview of each study. This gives you an indication of whether you're actually providing these services, and then on launch time, you'll get to see the full definition document. There are lots of other frequently asked questions that I can handle, but I think what I'll do is I'll hand this over to Sandy to handle any questions that we've got from the participants. And depending on time, I'll go back and handle some of the frequently asked questions as well, Sandy, if we need some more questions. So over to you.
Great. Thank you, Craig. So just to recap, we've heard from Scott Bursch, ISG APAC, we're growing. You know, we've already gone over the 100. In the 12 months I've been here, you know, we were in the 70s, and so it's been a huge growth in ISG in 12 months, and we're relevant. So at the moment, our advisors couldn't be busier. 2021 was a busy time, and we're just carrying on that work into 2022. Michael Gale talked about the importance of IPL and why it's important. I think probably the most thing is that we have a robust methodology that, you know, essentially gets, you know, that gets you to that shortlist. So we're sharing a list with you. We've got 22 in region, which is 14 in Australia, 8 in Singapore, Malaysia. Please have a look at the research schedule. Make a note. We know that there are a number of other competitors who have other quadrants, but just remember the importance of our IPLs. Yes, it's for your marketing. Yes, it's for customer education, but it is part of the process, our candidate provider qualification process. Now, in terms of questions, do we have any questions? Well, then we must have done an excellent job in educating the attendees here today. So we've got about 5 minutes. Scott, anything you'd like to finish with just before we close?
Well, I think just a couple of things. You know, Sandy, you, Michael, and Craig all talked about how this provides relevant information to the market. And I think the most important thing that you just highlighted, this is really a potential way for the clients to understand providers. And to Michael's point, there are a lot of limited and outdated views for people, not only in Australia, but globally. People form an opinion about a provider and who the provider ecosystem is. And in many cases, it literally can be 10, 15, or 20 years old and outdated. And so they won't even consider in many cases who else might be out there. And the Cpq process and the IPL reports are things that can be seen in the market to have someone besides yourselves talking about the capabilities that exist across the provider universe. And so that is where the real value comes in for our clients, as well as each of you. And as Craig mentioned, we're getting data publicly available. If you're in the market, we know it, and we're going to report on it. And so the more information we can get directly from you, the better position you can be and the more accurate we can be. We're going to be accurate from public sources as well for what's out there, but it's always ideal to be able to confirm it with each of you directly.
Michael, any last comments?
No, look, just really you know, the real takeaway from this is for the market, there's just so much granularity in the work that Craig does. You know, each IPL has got, you know, four to six different categories. You take 14 IPLs in Australia. That's a huge view on a really niche market. So So again, that's really critical for us, and it's also critical for making sure you get the best opportunities in the marketplace.
Thanks, Michael. Bursch, what can we look forward to hearing from you this afternoon? It's in another 6 or so hours.
Absolutely, Sandy. So, I mean, this afternoon we are going to launch the IPL program in Singapore and Malaysia after the success of this very same methodology in about 40 countries. So this definitely works, and this is something that Australian organizations could look forward to in expanding their Asia Pacific business. So if you're an organization that wants to look at really growing your presence as well as establishing yourself in Singapore and Malaysia, please have your teams join the afternoon sessions. This is at 2 p.m. Singapore or 5 p.m. Australian Eastern.
Thank you, Bursch. Craig, on behalf of Isg, we're very proud to have you as our research partner. You have done an awesome job, and we look forward to a long and very illustrious relationship with you. Thank you very much for what you've done. Clearly, we're going now from 7 to 22, and you've grown your team to support this huge initiative. I'd like to thank the delegates, from everywhere who's attended today. My name is Sandy Breeze. I lead the provider service business for Asia Pacific. If you would like to learn more about how you can engage with the advisors, please reach out to me. On the introduction slide, there's a QR code. Just scan that. That'll take you to our LinkedIn pages. And stay in touch with us, communicate. We'd love to hear your feedback about this event and always how we can improve. The next one we're looking at doing is around May. It's around our OCM and performance practice, OCM and Performex. And with this, it'll be more about education on how you can engage with us in these two service lines. So on that note, I wish you a great day, and we look forward to the next time we engage with you. Thank you.
Thank you.